Mike Lynn, Memorial League. Week 0. Power Rankings. Brought to you by my sense of procrastination. Welcome, everyone. I, once again, have the ambition to do a weekly Power Rankings podcast or video. Any of you are welcome to guest host it with me. We'll see if I actually go beyond week 4 this year. But know that my intentions are pure. Okay. We're going to get right to it with some site rankings. So coming out of the draft, there are a couple tools that are available on the site, both power rankings, and then there are links to external sites that grade us. So it's not my subjective grade. This is a third party, purely looking at the data. Now, the one on the bottom, which is projected points, I think that does not include our keepers, which would explain some of the grading. But it is always interesting to see what the unbiased algorithms tell us about the players on our teams. And the site's power rankings didn't make a lot of sense to me, although I do agree with one spot. And then the projected standings I thought were very interesting and probably not particularly accurate. Moving on. Some commentary on draft results, looking at the top half of the draft. I did find it interesting. Quarterbacks went in the first round. Perhaps I should have protected Russell Wilson. Herbert, can't argue with him being selected in the first. He's obviously very good. Moving into the second round, we saw the beginning of a run on tight ends. Hawkinson, Thomas, Tanyan, Goddard, all going. Rob gets some bad luck with selecting Gus Edwards, and now he is out for the year. Moving into the third round, we start to see some of those very boring running backs go as RB2s. Gaskin, Mike Davis, Raheem Mostert, Chase Edmonds. Big run on those guys without a lot of upside for any of them, as well as more reaching for tight ends by myself. And all in all, I'd say the draft, super fun to see people in person. Justin, thank you very much for hosting. It was a great venue. For those that were on Zoom, hopefully we can all get together next year. And if Justin's willing again, it was a lot of fun. Wish it could have hung out longer. So good job, everyone, on the draft. With that, I'm going to get right into my biased and subjective rankings of your teams. Starting with number 12, homies. I'm sorry, Todd, but I can't make heads or tails of your roster construction. I'm not saying that Lamar Jackson and Dak Prescott and Derrick Henry are not very good players, or that Kyle Pitts is not perhaps a generational talent at tight end. Those things can all be true, but it can also be true that the rest of your roster is a dumpster fire. And yeah, Jamar Chase might have upside. Chase Claypool is a good player, but to count on them as starters as opposed to depth is a perilous position to be in my opinion. And you've also wasted a roster spot on Cam Akers, who will have zero value to your team this year or next year. You're not going to keep a guy who's coming off an Achilles injury. And then you drafted 2 defenses with the same bye week. For your sake, I do hope that Elijah Moore is every bit as good as advertised, because you will need him. Perhaps things will be different after a trade, but it doesn't sound like you are trying to trade either quarterback right now. So I'm super interested and curious to see what will happen with your team. But for now, you are number 12. Moving to number 11, former MVP power, Mr. Selman. If not that you care, but if I were you, I would have traded some of your picks for better keepers, being left with the shit sandwich of Kenyon Drake or Ronald Jones in your second two, to me, was not ideal. I do think Robbie Anderson and Julio Jones are good players if they are your wide receiver 2 or 3, but they are your wide receiver 1 and 2. Not ideal. Mahomes obviously is the guy who could propel your team to better than expected outcomes, but I remain skeptical. Number 10, Stern Rake. Adam, you are being discounted in the rankings because you don't respond to trade offers. Not really, but sort of, but not really. Okay, Justin Herbert in the first round. It's interesting. Like, I can't make the argument against it because quarterback is obviously important. Yeah. So McCaffrey, Adams, Jefferson is an elite top 3. You need those 3 to remain elite. Otherwise, you will be in a significant amount of trouble, because outside of perhaps Josh Palmer and maybe one of those Bills running backs, but that's the most pass happy team in the league, I don't see a lot of other upside. And I'm also not a believer in Tanyan. You could find yourself in a pile of yesterday's corn, which brings us to number 9, Mr. Waldman. This ranking is a reflection of where my lack of confidence in one Saquon Barkley. I have the world's most sensitive mouse today. There we are, number 9, yesterday's corn. The Rodgers, Barkley, Carson, Godwin, Hopkins, that is the makings of a pretty good team if Barkley is healthy, which remains to be determined. Jonnu Smith at tight end, he's a talented player, but he's got competition from Hunter Henry on his own team. Cooper Kupp, very good depth. You might end up starting 3 wide receivers fairly often. I also want to see what happens with Henry Ruggs, because I think he's a tremendously talented player despite being on a very bad team. This number 9 could be the lowest you're ranked all year. Perhaps you end up quite a bit higher. Certainly have the potential to do just that. Okay, moving along to number 8, which I spoiled a little bit earlier, but as you see, it's Juchi's Giant Jocks. I like Diggs. I like Lockett. They're tremendous football players, if not tremendous fantasy football players. I mean, they are very good. Kelsey, obviously elite. I made a mistake in undervaluing Darren Waller. You probably properly valued him and went with the 2 tight end look. I want to see how that works out. I think quarterback is a bit of a weakness. I don't know. Maybe Joe Burrow fully recovers and can be a proper QB1 in fantasy. Having Montgomery as an RB1 with no true other option at running back that I'd feel good about starting, because I'm not confident in Chase Edmonds, is what has you at number 8. But we shall see. Top end of the roster is very good. Moving to number 7, Team Protein. Team Mang Gravy, as I accidentally put here. Okay. Love Kyler Murray. The running backs are good. Calvin Ridley might be the number 1 receiver in fantasy this year. So those things are all positive. I'm less sold on Goddard and on overall depth. Some things could go out, like Mike Davis, if he gets a proper workload, could be a true RB2, which would be great, but there's a threat from Wayne Gallman there. If something happens to Ezekiel Elliott, yeah, Tony Pollard would look great. Hey, Justin Jackson might prove to have value right out of the gates, as it looks like Eckler has missed some practice this week. So certainly potential to get into the playoffs. Discounted you one spot for rostering the unvaccinated Kirk Cousins. Moving on, we go to number 6, Stuntcock. Dave says that I squandered my elite roster, and perhaps he is correct, because I find myself with question marks at quarterback and less so at running back depth. I still have a lot of faith in the top end of my roster. Turns out if you're done picking by round 10, you end up just reaching for your defense and things like that. So perhaps I overvalued being able to finish the draft. I'm ready to say and declare that Donald Parham will end up being the steal of the draft. Number 5, Tuckfest. Perhaps this is the year that the curse is removed. You make the playoffs, nobody gets hurt, everything goes swimmingly. Najee Harris, AJ Brown, Tyreek Hill, Mark Andrews. This is a good top end of the roster. Antonio Brown could end up being the best receiver on the Bucs. Tannehill, that's a run first team. I don't love him as a QB1, but he's a very good in real life quarterback. And then perhaps Zach Wilson turns into a good rookie producing fantasy quarterback that you can keep around for the long term. You ended up getting extremely lucky with the pick of Tyson Williams, who's now the RB1 on one of the leading rushing attacks in the league. So your running back situation has vastly improved in the last few hours. And the Dobbins injury has now worked out in your favor, as Gus Edwards is also out for the year. Also like Odell, where you were able to keep him, and maybe the Michael Thomas selection would pay dividends if he managed to come back healthy and prove himself. He would have value going into 2022. Okay, number 4, Weapons of Matt's Distraction. Nice name, not. Looks like you have to set your lineup. I was interested in your draft strategy in that you already had 2 very high-end running backs, and you used the number 2 overall pick on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I am not saying by any means that that was the wrong move. It's just an interesting way to construct your roster. You definitely could make the case, the number 3 overall pick, Pitts 1 second. But you can make the case that that was absolutely the best player available, but choosing a player in the first round that does not slot into your starting lineup is an interesting way to build your team. That's all I am saying. I liked that you kept Brandon Ayuk, and I like that you have a mix of upside at receiver with guys like Ayuk, Deontay Johnson, and then some sure things like Adam Thielen and Brandon Cooks, who, despite being on a horrible team, has been good from a fantasy standpoint every year, as long as he avoids another concussion. Perhaps, question at quarterback when Matt Ryan followed by Trevor Lawrence, but long term, I think Lawrence was a tremendous value and could be someone that you end up keeping going into next year. That is at least a number 4 roster. Number 3, Senior Ass. I originally had you number 2, moved you down 1 spot with the news that Baltimore Ravens running back Gus Edwards is out more than likely for the season with a torn ACL. This makes your selection in the first round of Javonte Williams that much more critical that it has to hit. I really like your top three guys in Terry McLaurin and Aaron Jones and George Kittle. And I think you drafted very well, but your focus was obviously on upside. You have a number of rookies, Sermon, Williams, Marshall, Rondale Moore, and Pat Freiermuth. You need most of them to hit, I think, to sustain this number 3 ranking. But heck, I think we had all the same guys in our draft queue. I do like this roster quite a bit. We'll even without Gus Edwards as your RB2. Number 2, Tommy's Terminators. Tom, it's perhaps a mistake I made in round 1 was taking Amari Cooper over DJ Moore. I'm not entirely sure what I was thinking in the moment. I didn't expect Cooper to be available. I was like, I have to take Amari Cooper when I should have taken DJ Moore. I like Gaskin. I like Taylor. Russell Wilson in the first round, I can't really argue against. If he had maintained the torrid pace that he was on for 2/3 of the season last year, perhaps I would not have gotten trounced in the championship by Mr. Mulvihill. And there are some indicators based on who they hired as offensive coordinator that Wilson will have the same amount of opportunity in the passing game as he did at the beginning of last year. He has 2 elite targets to throw to in Metcalf and Lockett. So yeah, that could be a very good pick. Eckler getting injured, that looks like a short-term thing, so can't discount the team for that. I love the Ramondre Stevenson pick. I think that he could take Harris's job in New England over time. And Logan Thomas was someone that I was planning to draft until you took him about 8 picks before I had the opportunity to do so. And CeeDee Lamb, I think, ends up as the top 5 wide receiver. This is the number 2 team in the league. Oh, Callaway, also great pick. All right, moving on to number 1. That is Mulvihill. Honestly, it is difficult for me to justify moving the defending champ off of the number 1 spot, despite how much I wanted to do so. Here is the point where I admit I simply was outclassed in the title game last year. Dave would have beaten me even without Alvin Kamara's 6 touchdowns. This roster remains very good with Josh Allen, Nick Chubb, and Alvin Kamara, and you did an admirable job of rebuilding your receiving core with Allen, Woods, Judy, Jacoby Myers, and Brian Edwards. There is depth and upside at that position. The Trey Lance pick was interesting. You might end up pairing him with Josh Allen in your second 2 next year, or Deshaun Watson could find that spot. Rostering 4 quarterbacks was a choice, and it does mean that you have perhaps less depth at running back than would otherwise be ideal. And then if I'm going to knock a single thing, it's that you drafted Jimmy Graham, and he is not good at football, fantasy or otherwise, and I don't think that pick will have been worth it, however late it was in the draft. All right, let us move into everybody's favorite part of the show, and that is predictions. If my mouse worked, we could do that. Good thing that this isn't a widely viewed show. Otherwise, I would care and be embarrassed. But since it's not, I don't. Here. Predictions. Jam out for a second. All right. Mova Thrill throttles homies 75-45 in an absolute bloodbath. Senior Ass puts up a nice score in defeating Stuntcock 69-61. Stern Rake rides his top three to a comfortable win over former MVP Power 58-49. Weapons of Matt's Distraction. Nice name, not. Squeaks by Juchi's Sizable Jocks 64-63. Team Mangravy avoids the mess at the back door with a touchdown victory over yesterday's corn 58-51. And finally, Tommy's Terminators in a close one versus Tuckfest 60-59. All right. That's how I see it. Feel free to come at me. Good luck to everybody this week, except Rob. All right. Until next time. See ya.